If you can't end up doing exactly what you want, find something that gets you close enough. Surely someone wise said that somewhere, and maybe it was Dave Despain. After trying to make it as an amateur motorcycle racer, but breaking his ankle and having the doctor tell him that he might lose his foot if he breaks it again, Dave decided to throw in the racing towel. But he didn't completely walk away from racing. He switched it up and started calling the action instead as a PA announcer and broadcaster. He's enjoyed a multi-decade career covering flat track and road racing, NASCAR, and he's even had a couple of his own shows, the most famous of which is WindTunnel with Dave Despain. Despite Dave's involvement in the four-wheel scene, motorcycling is clearly in his DNA. In fact, he's taken his trusty Kawasaki KLR650 on an amazing adventure to Alaska, nicknamed Dave's Arctic Adventure, and covered it all for the Speed Channel. This is Dave Despain, I'm your host Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. Dave Despain, you're on Driven to Ride. Hello.
Hey, nice to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Let's just jump right in. I'm just going to say this from the get-go. I know who you are, but let's pretend I don't. What do most people kind of know you for? What is your claim to fame?
I don't think of it that way, but I guess it would have to be WindTunnel, which was the highest rated show that I worked on a regular basis. There were higher rated individual episodes, like when I was a pit reporter for CBS or whatever, but week in, week out, that would have been the biggest audience that I got to play to. It was a great show. It was a fun show. It was on Speed Channel for those who aren't familiar with it. We had an 11-year run, which is pretty remarkable in the racing business, any of the television applications. And we covered all kinds of motorsports, which has been, I guess, a theme throughout my career. I was thinking about that, knowing that you would probably ask. The first TV show I did on a regular basis was called Motor Week Illustrated. And like WindTunnel, we were determined, part of our mission statement was to cover all kinds of racing, not to just be the NASCAR show or whatever. And that was dear to my heart because I came out of the motorcycle world, and one of my personal goals was to get more motorcycle racing exposure on television. And since I was the host, I got to decide in the end, well, most of the time, I got to decide what went on the air. And so we got our share of motorcycle coverage that way.
I have to say, you have to be probably one of the more prolific motorcycle, if not motorsport broadcasters who's been around. So,
well, if you stay long enough, you ought to make some kind of an impression on people. And I was at it for a long time. I mean, I did my first radio broadcast when I was 16, I think.
Wow.
People ask me, how'd you get into broadcasting? Well, by being a failed football player. My father thought that I should play football, and so I dutifully tried, and I was very bad at it, but also proved to be easily hurt, easily injured. So on a particularly cold, rainy, miserable October night in southeast Iowa when I was a sophomore, I was sitting on the bench with my injury of the week. It was just a horrible night, and we're getting beat 38-8 or something like that. And so I'm sitting there looking around, and I noticed that warm and dry up in the press box overlooking the 50-yard line is this kid that I knew and his cute girlfriend, and he's announcing the football game to a crowd of 2, maybe. And I thought, I wonder how that works. So I did a little research and found out that the Speakers Club provided the student announcers for all the different sports.
Okay.
And so I immediately joined the Speakers Club and gave up on football, much to my father's chagrin, but in the end proved to be a really good decision. So again, this is Fairfield, Iowa. It's a town of 5,000 people with a 250-watt daytime radio station, smallest broadcast operation that the FCC licenses. And to show you how sort of small town and small time it was, one of the Speakers Club activities was to take over the radio station at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, every Saturday morning, for an hour for the voice of FHS, Fairfield High School.
Oh, wow.
And have students do all the stuff, the engineering and writing and the announcing, which is the part that I thought I was best suited for. And lo and behold, I became a regular. And one day the boss came in and said, when the high school show was over, and said, "Would you consider doing this every day? You come in right after school. You could get in about an hour before we're forced to sign off by the FCC rules." And I said, "Sure. Yeah, I'd do that." So I became a disc jockey, if you will, at the age of, by then I'm sure I was 16, maybe 17.
Okay.
That was my first radio experience. And then things overlapped when the motorcycle bug bit, and I'd been working at the radio station by that time 4 or 5 years, knew a little bit about it, and so was by default made the PA announcer for the local motorcycle club's track that we built. Very nice racetrack, by the way, on an old airport piece of land that was donated to us. And we ran races, lots of races over a long period of time. And I learned a lot about, organizing and building bleachers and so forth. And then one day decided, well, I ought to get my bike out there and slide around in the dirt. I was never much of a dirt rider.
Sure.
And proved that pretty quickly by continuing my football pattern of getting hurt, but also found that it was just great fun. And so I decided to try to become a dirt track racer.
Okay.
That story can be summed up in 20 seconds. I wasn't very good at it, but it was so much fun. Just the most fun you can have on two wheels, in my opinion, to this day. So dirt track racing became my favorite thing. I did it for a while, badly. Mostly, I had a friend who was really good. He was destined to be an AMA expert. So I would basically go run my 4 laps of practice, my 4-lap heat race, never make it out of the heat, and then help him the rest of the day because he was always in the novice main event. So that was, it was kind of a mixed bag of me having fun and me helping Kenny. And he made it right to the brink of expert and then decided to get married and quit racing, and that was the end of that.
Oh, wow. How did you get into motorcycling?
I don't really understand how that happened. There was no background in my family at all.
Wow.
For any kind of motorsports. Motorcycles were absolutely forbidden. Literally.
Really?
My parents made it clear to me that if I ever came home with a motorcycle, I'd have to go find another place to live. And true to their word, when I turned 18 and could sign the paperwork myself and bought my first bike and brought it home, they said, hit the road, Jack.
Wow.
Which I thought was pretty harsh.
Sure.
But I can't say they didn't warn me. I went in with my eyes open.
Yeah.
And bless their hearts, I understand in retrospect that they were just concerned about my safety. They just didn't want me to get hurt.
Sure.
But at the time, 18 and rebellious and all that, I thought it was a terrible travesty. And so I moved into the back seat of my 53 Mercury and lived on the north side of the Fairfield Square, Fairfield, Iowa, southeast corner, in the wintertime. So it was, I made a fair sacrifice or two for my love of motorcycling early on. That all got worked out over time, but at the time it was, it was a bit of a trauma. The access to motorcycling came about sort of by accident. I had a good friend whose dad was a mechanic. His dad built him a little mini bike, lawnmower engine, typical homemade thing.
Yeah.
My friend didn't care anything about that because he was a car guy. He had a 56 Ford, was pretty fast, and he didn't care about motorcycles. He said, you want this thing? I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. So I would careen around town on that little open pipe mini bike. Never got arrested. To the best of my knowledge, my parents never knew I had it. Kept it a block down the street at a friend's house. And so I would leave the house and run that block down to where the bike lived and jump on it. And nobody heard me coming, but they all heard me leave. It was really, really loud. And so that was my first, introduction to motorcycling. Again, fast forward to age 18, bought my own, just went hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
I mean, I was absolutely in love with it from the first moment and remain that way to this day.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit, because you started your broadcasting career there in Iowa. And how did you get into then broadcasting, specifically motorcycling and motorsport and racing on TV?
It's a long story, and the short version of it, it's down to dumb luck and utter bullshit. The dumb luck came, I become a radio announcer of sorts in this little radio station. Realized that I'm never going to make a living as a racer when I added up my earnings for my last year, and they were $35. You're not going to be a professional motorcycle racer. You need to get a job.
Right.
And I thought, how about a radio show about motorcycles? I could do that. I know a lot about motorcycles, motorcycle racing, and I know a little bit about radio. Well, I couldn't make that fly. But in the course of that, I managed to land a job with the sanctioning body, the American Motorcycle Association. So now I'm writing press releases about motorcycle racing during the week and going off to announce national championship motorcycle races, a big step up from the Fairfield Motorcycle Club, on weekends. And this was a perfect life for me. And so in 1975, we go to Daytona for the Daytona 200 in March.
Okay.
And ABC Wide World of Sports showed up at the absolute last minute, made a deal with the France family for the rights to the race, and let it be known that they needed an expert analyst. They didn't have such a thing at ABC Wide World of Sports because they didn't cover that much motorcycle racing.
Okay.
And they would use one of their car guys if they did. My boss looked the producer straight in the eye and said, "You should use our guy Dave here. He's got a lot of electronic media experience," which is true. I had worked many, many hours at a 250-watt daytime radio station in southeast Iowa. What more qualifications could you need than that?
Yeah, you're the most experienced guy in the room.
Yeah. The producer, who clearly didn't care and just wanted to get this over with and get out of Daytona, said to me, "Go down on pit road with that cameraman and look in the camera, and in 45 seconds, explain to someone who knows nothing about motorcycles why they should watch this race."
Wow.
I thought, well, I can do that. Today, an international field of jockey-sized athletes has gathered here at the famed Daytona International Speedway for one of the most venerable and important motorcycle races in the world. The Daytona 200, born here way back in 1937 on the old beach course. Today, these 80 motorized daredevils will careen around the Daytona high banks faster than Richard Petty, inches from the concrete wall, protected only by their space-age crash helmets and a thin layer of cowhide. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a race you do not want to miss. 43 and a half seconds. He looked at me and said, you're hired. Wow. So my first television show was, at that time, the most important sports television show in the world.
Yeah, Wide World of Sports.
Thrill of victory, agony of defeat. I guess I should have been more overwhelmed than I was, but I quickly figured out that, these guys were working a formula. You could substitute dune buggies or jet planes for the motorcycles, and their approach would be basically the same. They were very professional. Keith Jackson didn't know very much about motorcycle racing, but there I was right next to Keith when our yellow Century 21 looking blazers that they wore back in that period, and me with my bushy hippie haircut and beard. But it was, it was good, and I wasn't all that intimidated about it. Again, I'd been broadcasting at a much different level, of course, but still, it's all the same.
Sure.
For many years, so I kind of knew how to do it. was just getting the opportunity, and that's where the utter bullshit from my boss came in. And, that was my first television show. And then the dumb luck continues, because being in Daytona for the motorcycle race, I meet all the Motor Racing Network people who primarily covered NASCAR, but back then also did the motorcycle race. And so I became an MRN guy, and a lot of weekends I would go announce a Saturday night motorcycle race and then careen to the nearest NASCAR race and be a corner announcer for Motor Racing Network.
Oh, wow.
And the host of those broadcasts was one Ken Squire, a name familiar to stock car fans for sure because of the 1979 Daytona 500, first live flag-to-flag telecast of a NASCAR race. And he was the anchor, less well-known. He was the guy who sold CBS on the idea of doing that race. He came to me after I did the Wide World of Sports thing and said, I saw that show. You did a really good job. Would you be interested in doing more of that kind of thing?
Oh, cool.
Sure. Why not? I had a job that I loved with the AMA. Why not add some television? Besides, it paid well. So the following year, we did like a half dozen races. We did the LA Coliseum Supercross and the Laguna Seca Road Race, and we did a mile dirt track or two, I think. And
wow,
Laguna Seca. I don't remember. We did a half dozen shows, and it was at that point that I started to think, this might be something I'd want to do down the road. But I still had my AMA job, loved my AMA job, so I wasn't actively looking for a reason to leave.
Sure.
But it was really nice part-time work on the side. Then if you fast forward from the Daytona race to 1982, I guess it was, Squire came to me and said, I have a scheme for a weekly motorsports highlight show. And I came up with this with the idea that it would be my show, mine, Ken Squire's show.
Okay.
But now I've got a contract with CBS, so I can't do a show on another network. We're going to take this to Turner Broadcasting, and we'd like you to be the host. Oh, wow. Okay. Sure. Once again, dumb luck. Right place, right time. So that was the start of my full-time television career.
Okay.
1982, Motor Week Illustrated, Turner Broadcasting, WTBS, Superstation.
That's pretty cool. And then from there, you did WindTunnel.
WindTunnel came a good bit later. I can't remember the year WindTunnel started. I should have looked that up before we did. We had an 11-year run, and it ended 4 years ago. So you can probably do the math. But my goal was always to be the motorcycle guy, to be the motorcycle radio guy, be the motorcycle television guy, be the motorcycle guy. I was often, quote, promoted, unquote, into the car racing world because the people that I worked for, TBS initially, ESPN, etc., all considered that a move up. Car racing was much more important than motorcycle racing in their mind, so they viewed it as a promotion, and I viewed it as stepping back a step.
Extra work, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so there were some difficult negotiations over that, but for the most part, it was good. I have no complaints. I mean, I tell a lot of people it sure beat having a real job for all those years. So.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I know over the course of the years, you did get to share your love of motorcycles and evidently long distance motorcycles. Tell me a little bit about where Dave's Arctic Adventure came from.
Another long story that I'll make short. When it would have been in the early 70s, I broke my left ankle really badly trying to be a motocrosser.
Okay.
And it took a bunch of surgery. And when it was all done after a year and a half, the orthopedic surgeon said, I know you're a motorcycle guy. I know you're going to want to get back on your bike. I'm not going to give you the speech that says you shouldn't do that. But I will tell you this. If you break that ankle again, there are no repairs available. We're going to have to amputate your foot.
Oh my God.
I thought, oh, that's pretty serious.
Yeah.
So, and I had broken that ankle by wearing the wrong boots. And so I thought, well, I will give up dirt bike riding. I'm not very good at it. I'm never going to make any money at it, obviously, but I'd already proven that. I will stick to street bikes. I'm not going to quit riding, but I'll stick to street bikes. And I stuck to that for, a long time. When did I guess it was into the early 2000s.
That's a promise well kept then.
Yeah, I thought so. That's, 30 years and never crashed a street bike. So I decided at that point, I'm going to ease back into dirt riding because adventure riding was just taking off. And I bought, sight unseen off the internet, a used KLR, Kawasaki 650 single, because I'd always heard that they were, the Swiss Army knife of motorcycles and would go anywhere and were bulletproof. Well, I had decided I was going to ride down the Baja Peninsula by myself. And so I got the KLR for that purpose. I bought a used one off the internet for $2,600, put everything on it that I thought I needed, looking at various websites, and rode off into the sunset. Well, the hook was set pretty deeply. I quickly, first of all, I had the ride of a lifetime down Baja, stuck to the pavement for the most part because I was by myself, and there's a reason that dirt riders need to ride by them, ride in groups as opposed to by themselves. But I made it all the way down to Cabo. My wife flew in. We had a little celebration. I turned around and rode back.
Okay.
And it was wonderful. And then I really started exploring the local opportunities for adventure riding, and there are a ton of them. I'm in Middle Georgia, just below the foothills of the Smokies, the Appalachian Mountains, and it's just wonderful riding. And
Beautiful
I fell in
area.
with the KLR crowd, and they were great people, very welcoming. They all take care of one another. It was just a lot of fun to go do their rides and rallies over a span of time. Well, now we fast forward into, I guess it was, I don't remember the year, but pretty late in the WindTunnel experience. And I really wanted to go to Alaska. I wanted to go back to Alaska. The circumstances of the first go around to Alaska are probably relevant. My wife was a career change veterinarian, and when she graduated, we went to Alaska on the cruise to celebrate her graduation.
Okay.
And unbeknownst to her, I had arranged to borrow a BMW in Anchorage and ride it back to the States, and then we would fly home. It was all going to be a big surprise for her.
Nice.
On the first night, she got food poisoning.
Oh, no.
And so there's a whole long story associated with that. But I ended up leaving the BMW in Alaska, flying home with her, flying back to Alaska to get the motorcycle, riding it partway back, running out of time, leaving it again, flying back home, working, flying back. It took three legs to get it home.
Wow.
But so now, but the Alaska bug had bitten in a very big way.
Okay.
And so I wanted to go back. And now I'm doing a weekend, 38 weeks a year television show. So it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to just take off and go to Alaska.
Right. Yeah.
I proposed to the boss's boss that I would send back video postcards if they would let me have 5 weekends in a row off.
Okay.
They kind of grumbled and complained, and then decided, okay, we'll do that. And it became great fun doing it because it was all very amateurish. It was, I'm not a technical person, so the idea of shooting video with my phone and editing it on my laptop and all of that was all new and different. And but it was a great trip. I went with 2 couples. My wife was not at that point able to go; she was working. So these 2 couples that had been friends all our lives went. There were 5 of us on 4 motorcycles.
Cool.
They made up a funny little graphic for the TV show. So every Sunday night for 5 weeks, we tune in for the latest in Dave's Arctic Adventure. And the idea was that we would go to Prudhoe Bay. We would go up the Dalton Highway and dip our toes in the Arctic Ocean. That was pretty ambitious for three old guys. And we had a plan for where our wives were going to stay and all that, so that so it'd be fun for them too. Their wives, my wife, as I said, couldn't go. So anyway, we take off and have this terrific trip, and the ratings actually got better than when I was there. That was a little bit disturbing, because I thought, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? They want me to go do this all the time. So,
yeah, exactly.
So I rode from home, from Charlotte, where I had done the show on Sunday night. Monday morning, took off from Charlotte, headed for Memphis, I guess, 600 miles. And it was 102 degrees and just miserable. Just horrible. And I thought, it's going to be like this for a while, so I need to roll in some miles while I'm fresh. And I did that. I got to Memphis about dark, went down to Beale Street, got some ribs, listened to some blues singers, and then worked my way up to Oregon and Washington, somewhere up in there.
Okay.
And took the Alaska Highway up to Tok. And Tok, T-O-K, is kind of a decision point. If you go right, you go up to the Dalton, you go to Fairbanks and then on to the Dalton and up to Prudhoe Bay. If you go left, you go to Anchorage and southeast Alaska. And we were paying attention to a British tour group that were making the Prudhoe Bay run. And they had quite a number of adventures, and they were about 200 miles ahead of us, and they were in all kinds of rain. And the more we talked about it, the more we thought, this is kind of a fool's errand. We ought not be doing this.
Yeah.
And the next morning, one of the riders in that group died in a crash.
Oh my God.
And that was the end of it. That was when we decided we're not going up there.
Yeah, good call.
And a truck driver, about the time we made that decision, the truck driver pulled in next to us and said, where are you guys headed? Yeah, we're going to Prudhoe Bay. Why? I said, well, it's kind of a bucket list thing for motorcycle people to go up the Dalton Highway and stick a toe in the ocean. And he said, have you ever been to Anchorage, been to the Southeast Peninsula? I said, well, I have. They haven't. And he said, well, forget about you. He looked at them and says, if you go to Prudhoe Bay, just so you can say you did it, and don't go to Southeast Alaska, you will have made a huge mistake. And then combined that with the information about the fatality and decided, okay, yeah, it's probably right. We'll skip that. We'll go to Anchorage. So we did that. So anyway, it was Athens, Georgia, to Charlotte, to Memphis, to wherever it was that we rendezvoused, and then all the way up the highway, the Alaska Highway. And then as we were getting ready to come home, my friend Chris says, I rode my KLR all the way from Detroit because we were going to go ride in the dirt. And now we haven't been in the dirt, and I'm unhappy. And I said, well, if we get up really early in the morning and really haul ass, we can get to the Arctic Circle midday.
Okay.
Go up through Fairbanks and take the Dalton Highway, but we just don't. We'll stop 250 miles short of the bucket list destination. He said, "You're on."
Okay.
So we did that. Got to the Arctic Circle, took each other's pictures, jumped back on, and rode back the other way, and then called it good and headed for home.
There you go.
So I promised to make that shorter, but the story lasted almost as long as the trip itself. But yeah, it was a wonderful trip. It really was.
So how many miles was that total at the end of the day?
I don't remember. The plan all along had been that I would ship my bike home because I had to go back to work. I couldn't talk about it any more than that. And 5 weeks was pretty extensive vacation.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and it was a lot of miles, but I'm unfortunately I don't remember.
I got you. Well,
6 or 7 thousand, I suppose.
I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's more than some people ride in a season, and you did it in
Oh
5 weeks. So
yeah, yeah. I've always been like that. I like riding by myself because I like to go my own pace, stop when I want to, go when I want to, and I don't like stopping. I like once I get the bit in my teeth, I just like to go. But the majority of that trip was me by myself, so I got my opportunity to get my fill of that.
yeah. So what have you learned, or what did you learn, like in terms of maintaining and getting those high mileage days and not just being completely shredded by the end of the day? Or were you?
I was pretty shredded at the end of the 102, 103 degree days. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't think people fully appreciate how dangerous it can be to ride a motorcycle in those kind of conditions because you're setting yourself up for heat related problems that are probably going to sneak up on you. Uh, I never had, I have never had heat exhaustion that I know of. Been close to it a couple of times, and one of the little elements we did in the Arctic Adventure scrapbook was taking a Aero Stitch jacket, which has huge pockets inside and out,
Mm-hmm.
open those long zipper pockets and pour a bunch of ice in there.
Smart.
And then for the next 100 miles, that ice will melt and just be just as cool as can be. And then it's almost like a switch. When the last of the ice is gone, it immediately starts to turn into hot water, and it's time to find another ice machine. But you learn tricks like that over the years, and I think backing up a little bit and sort of looking at the bigger picture, the thing that adventure riding taught me was a two-part lesson. One, how little I know about that sort of thing. Uh, how to do it, how to fix my own bike, all the rest of that. And the other side is how good I am at that sort of thing if you put it on the greater scale. I mean, if you're by yourself and it breaks, you got to fix it.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I was able to do that. There have been times I've had 3 KLRs, and 2 of them had trailer rides during their lifetime.
Okay.
Because I couldn't problems. But for the most part, I was able to apply my very limited mechanical knowledge and resourcefulness and, get done what needed to be done. And I think to me, that's the big lesson in adventure riding. Get out there and do it. And when something goes wrong, it seems terrible at the time, and it makes a great war story when it's all done. So,
oh, sure.
it pleases me to see all the people that are doing serious adventure riding. I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's like broadcasting, I guess. I mean, you got to, the way to get better at it is just to get out there and do it.
Yeah. Don't worry too much about consequences. Just, odds are nobody's going to die, and, away you go. The other thing that I've learned is that I didn't witness this, but I think it's a very good example of the point I'd like to make. I had a friend that I had lunch with the other day, and he was telling me about riding his old GS, the old Airhead
Oh, okay. Yeah.
GS in Colorado, and they were doing the famous passes, Engineer and Imogene and all the rest, Black Bear, what is it, Bear, and he's on this big, heavy motorcycle, and he's old. He's older than I am, I think, but he's in better shape. Anyway, the point is that they were trucking along, being pretty proud of themselves, and got to the summit, stopped and got off the bikes and saw somebody coming behind them, and it was 2 guys on unicycles with knobby tires and huge backpacks, like they were going to, unicycle around the world. Well, it turned out they were unicycling around America, and Colorado was the biggest challenge they'd had because they were riding their unicycles to these 14,000 foot passes. And
That's
to me,
insane.
the lesson in that is no matter how big an adventure you think you're having right at the time, somebody out there is doing something that's like 9 times as crazy as what you're doing. So just keep on trucking, have fun, keep a smile on your face. When things go wrong, deal with it. And then when you get home, buy lots of beer because you're going to have lots of stories to tell.
Yeah. Ride your own ride, man. I like it. So that's probably, I'd say it's safe to say that's probably the biggest trip you've ever taken.
Probably the most miles. I did 2, 3 trips, 4 trips. I don't know how many times I've been down Baja.
Okay.
Several. Not on the motorcycle a couple of times, once in a buggy. A couple of them were TV gigs. Another was I got to be the Grand Marshal for what was called the Mexican 1000. It was like a rally as opposed to a race.
Okay.
And I took my Gold Wing down for that because I knew that was going to be all pavement. That was a lot, and it's a long ride. So, but as far as total mileage in one trip, the Alaska trip would have been the bell ringer.
Was that your favorite trip, do you think, or is it kind of hard to place, the top 3, top 5, anything like that?
Very difficult. It would certainly rank in the top 3, just because until you see it, you can't really appreciate how vast Alaska is.
Sure.
And when you screw up and lose your focus at a gas stop and do everything that's on the checklist at the gas stop except put gas in, and then you ride 100 miles before you notice it, that that helps you appreciate the vastness of Alaska. But then you have to decide, okay, am I going to go back or am I going to take my chances? And in that case, I kept going, and there was a gas station not far down the road. It's not always like that in those faraway places.
It's more dumb luck.
More dumb luck. Yeah. you cannot do better than dumb luck. I mean, I occasionally made wise decisions. I remember one time I was in Florida going to somewhere, I think I was going to Key West. I've been down to Key West on my motorcycle many times because one of my best friends would always go down there in the wintertime. And so I had laid out a route, taking the smallest roads I could find all the way to Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on this gravel road that turned to a dirt road that turned to a sand road. And then it quit being a road and was just 2 tire tracks with grass growing in the middle. And I thought,
oh, wow,
this is not looking promising. And but there's nothing on the GPS that indicates there's going to be a problem. So I come around a bend, down a little dip, and there's a creek, which normally would have been manageable, but there was a lot of water moving. It had rain upstream somewhere, and by my own admission, I'm not much of a dirt rider, but most importantly, I couldn't see how you get out of the creek. I could see where you ride into it, but I couldn't see any way out. And so I tiptoed out into the water, and lo and behold, 50 yards downstream, there's an exit. So you got to go into the creek, make left, ride through the mud and slop and water, and then turn and ride out the other side. And I looked at it for 15 minutes before I decided I'm not going to do that. I'm overloaded. When I drop the bike in the creek, everything's going to get wet. I'm going to have to take it all off. I won't be able to pick it up. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to turn around and go back, which is there are a few things in life that I hate more than that, but I did it that time, and I was very proud of myself for having used good judgment, something I'm not always known for.
Yeah, it's nice when you can make those calls. What do they say in business? It's like sometimes the best decisions are the ones that you walk away from.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I have experience at falling down in creeks. I know how to do it. I've seen it done by the experts. I've done it myself enough times. Scott Russell, former world road racing champion, joined us on a dual sport ride up in Tennessee somewhere. And I don't know how they do it, but in Tennessee, they have flat rocks in all the creek bottoms that have moss growing on them, slicker than snot. And it's every creek like that. And so we all totter across safely, and Russell's the last to come across. And He's former world champion. So he kicks it into gear and kicks it up in a big wheelie, and he's going to wheelie through the water and splash us all.
Geez.
He gets about 4 feet into the stuff, hits the moss, the bike flips out from under him, drops him in the water, and drops the Honda in 2 feet of water, and where it abruptly stopped. So we're all laughing and having fun at the expense of the world champion. And somebody says, "You got tools, right?" "No, don't have any tools." "Oh, well, one of us will have a plug wrench that size." So we're all digging out our tools because we've all packed, judiciously. That's part of the fun of dual sport riding, is learning to do it, or adventure riding is learning to do it better every time by learning how to pack, learning what you need, what you don't need, what you can leave behind. Well, none of us had a plug wrench that size, so we can't start the Honda. So now it's not quite as funny making fun of the world champion as it was. And his cousin, who was with us, said, "I'll ride into town." And he said, "I'll get a plug wrench and be back." So he goes and he comes back, and he's got the only plug wrench they had, and it's the wrong size. So now we've been there for 2 hours, and it's stopped being fun a long time ago. And Russell's feeling pretty chagrined because he's put us all through that. But he's not going to let on. So he gets a big grin on his face, and he says, "Well, I guess in that case, we might as well just go." He walked over and kicked the Honda, and it started on the first kick. It had, all the water had run down into the crankcase, and it was dried out enough to run. And I looked at his cousin. I said, "Do we need to turn it upside down and drain the water out of it?" He said, "No, we're gonna just go. If it needs a new lower end, I'll just trade it in." Scott was a little more reserved after that, but that's my favorite Scott Russell story.
Oh, man. Well, that kind of bringing it back to kind of broadcasting in your day job a little bit. You've been a motorcycle racer. You've done radio, TV. You've worked in PR at the American Motorcycling Association. You've done a couple 3 PA announcements. What was your favorite corner of the motorcycling world to be in?
Well, sitting on the seat, going somewhere a long way off, oftentimes in the middle of the night. Nothing associated with motorcycling is more fun than the riding part of it. The socializing and the camaraderie and the storytelling after the fact and the near misses and the injuries and all the other things that go with it.
Yeah.
Are great, but nothing beats the act of riding your motorcycle. That's number one. If I broaden the scope to incorporate the other aspects of motorcycling that I've been fortunate enough to get involved in, winning a race, that was big. I only won one, so it was easy to remember. But I think having gotten this far, I realized that probably the answer to your question is doing PA announcing at Dirt Track Nationals, what's now called the American Flat Track Series. Back then it was called the Grand National Championship.
Okay.
And I don't know how many dozen, maybe hundreds of races as the PA announcer. And there are a lot of things I like about that. A few things I don't like, but a lot of things I like about that, and I kept going back for more. But I suppose that would probably be my favorite niche. Followed closely by any of the good motorcycle TV shows that we ever pulled off, and there were several of those too.
Yeah,
that was those were, anytime you walk away from a TV show and feel like it was worth watching, that's kind of a nice feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Unless there's anything else that maybe I missed that you wanted to talk about, either about, adventure riding or your broadcasting career or anything like that.
I should give a shout out to Chris Economaki. He's a car guy, didn't know or care very much about motorcycle racing, but taught me a lot. One of Chris's pet peeves is pit reporters or victory circle announcers who look into the camera and deliver a minute and a half treatise on everything they know about this driver, and then without asking a question, just stick the microphone in his or her face. and expect him or her to respond with a pithy soundbite.
Right.
And I did that my very first NASCAR race. I was so proud of all the things I knew about Joe Ruttman and his family and the whole California NASCAR scene and blah, 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 blah. And I get all to finally let Joe talk. And we get back to the TV compound, and Economaki walks up beside me and tugs on my sleeve and gives me a look. And so I follow him, and we walk away out of earshot from the crowd. And he says, "Next time, just ask the guy a good question." and I've never forgotten that advice. I've gotten a lot of accolades, if you will, over time for my interviewing skills, but it all goes back to Economaki. It's all about asking good questions. It's not about trying to show off how much you know. So thanks to the late Chris, along with Ken Squire and Fred Reinstein and everybody else who helped me avoid having a real job for all these years.
Yeah, and I think that's just good life advice too, is just ask good questions and maybe add on listen more than you speak.
Bingo. Yeah. There's a variation on that I can't think of, but it has to do with your inability to learn when your mouth is in motion. And when you get paid to talk, it's hard to keep that in mind, but it's also important to keep it in mind because, again, if you do it correctly, the star of the show will be the guy who just won the race, as it should be, and not the guy holding the microphone.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, Dave, it's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to listen to you and hear your stories. And congratulations on a heck of a career. And we really appreciate you being on the show.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. They didn't even have podcasts when I started in this business. How did I get so old? Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC. Made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.